record. Hello, and you're here with Mark the Artist, and as I promised you, this is the follow-up video to my previous video where I put the underpainting on the canvas in acrylic. So this is when we're using mixed media. Bit of a tutorial, or you can just watch me paint, depending on what you like. Yeah, so I've got a base layer down of various colours, and now I'm going to work into that with oil-based paints and using palette knives. And today I'll be using White Spirit because I lent all my turpentine out to somebody else and forgot that I might need it. But White Spirit for this will work. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing is selecting my colours. So I've got my oil colours here. I tend to divide them into spectrums, so I have little boxes for different colours. So today I'm mostly going to be working into this in purples and reds. Yeah. Now, just a word on painting with oil colours for safety, as this is a sort of slide tutorial. If you're using oil paint and you wipe stuff down with rags, they can burst into flames, and that is why you should dispose of them correctly. Put them in a metal tin. A little bit of a safety tip, people don't know that stuff, and yet the Glasgow School of Art seems to burn down every year for that exact reason. So, right, I'm going to start off by layering some, get some nice red pigment in there, and then I'm going to add some White Spirit to it. Now I tend to do this on a sort of an unconscious sort of a level. I mean, can you actually see what I'm doing there? Probably not. Just move that over a bit. I'm just working this into the underlying pattern. And that's going to bring out some of the textures and the pigments underneath that I've used as the base layer. And if you work in red over red, it really is going to give you a deep, interesting next layer, because obviously I'm going to work back into this in resin later because that's what I do. So I'm just layering that in there, moving over the top, following some of my previous strokes, trying to sort of zone out a bit, working with my feelings, getting emotional content in there, because emotional content is what separates reasonable painters from great painters. You've got to have that emotional content. That's how you can spot a real artist, emotional content. So I hope I've got some. Yeah, so I hope you guys are all doing well, off in TV land, all my sports fans. This isn't a live video, so there's no comments or anything. Mel the terrain shooter, who's got a studio upstairs, because we're in Ackerver in Stoke, he gave me a few pointers on how to actually make people find the video on YouTube. So hopefully some people will find this one, and it won't just be my pals linking to it from Facebook. So yeah, there we go. Learn something new every day, especially about social media. Yeah, seriously. There we go. Get some purple in there. Right. I'm like a poor man's Bob Ross, aren't I? Happy little accidents. Perhaps there's a nice tree over here. Perhaps there's a little man behind the tree. Or there might not be a little man behind the tree. Perhaps the little man is on fire. You know, and obviously if you overwork something and you know, you've got a little bit too much pigment on there, a little bit too much texture, you can just thin it out with some more. I mean, for this demo I'm using White Spirit, but turpentine substitute is great. Or if you've got some turpentine, which I have, which obviously I usually have, which I've lent out, you know, I'm just really bringing out those rich tones. So obviously if you find me on Instagram, Mark Edmonds Art Instagram. I will post some pictures of this painting as I'm working on it, and you can see, you know, the end result once the washes have dried, and you know, once I start working back into it in colours and resins and such, you know. Yeah, I've got some nice deep reds here, and trying to avoid black in oil, because if you go over the black as you're working, it'll fuse and bring out some of the depth in the paint. Okay. I've got these beautiful palette knives from Don, who used to live next door, and he's moved out sadly, so I don't have an architect in the next studio anymore. So nobody putting the heating on. I have to put my own heating on now. And then of course you follow the previous pattern that you've made and try and get some of those blends in there. Right, now I think it's time. Oh no, let's have a bit more purple in there. Like a nice purple streak in the middle, and bring out those tones in the bottom. Yeah, that's the way I open paint, but probably shouldn't. It's not good for your teeth. It's probably not good for the paint. Sometimes it's the only way though. I'll get a bit more, you know. And obviously, I'm not wearing breathing apparatus and safety stuff, but this can get a bit fumey, so you might want to wear a mask. I'm not wearing a mask because, and I couldn't talk to you. Well, I could, but it'd be all muffled, like. Yeah, sorry, that was a bit shit. Yeah, and depending on the quality of your oil paint, you're going to get sort of different levels of granulation when you do oil washes. I mean, this is the way I generally tend to do oil washes. You can mix up the wash first and then apply it, but I like to be a little bit more free than that when I'm working abstract. You know, and obviously you've got to watch out, because as you go over the textures underneath, it's going to flick paint around, so you might end up with patches of paint that you didn't want previously. You know, but the best way to learn is from other people's mistakes. So I've just made a few for your benefit there. Okay, that's nice. I'm just gonna go get some more paint in a different colour. Yeah, I'm just sticking to colour spectrum today rather than you know, using blacks and things to mute it down. When I do when I apply a resin wash over the top, it might be a dark resin wash, so you know, that would essentially mute the painting on the next layer. This time I'm just going to put a bit of yellow in. For some reason I've just got into yellow this year, and as Alberto asked in my previous podcast, he's actually here today, stumbling around, wearing a Venice hat and looking at maps. Yeah, so he asked about the influence of Italy in my work and how it was going to affect it. Well, I'm definitely using brighter colours. I'm using brighter colours because I'm happier. I would definitely recommend going to Italy to everybody. If you've never been, go. And the south is better than the north, because it just is. Even though my family's from the north, so don't let them hear I said that. Yeah. So that's a nice blend. You get some granulation popping in. It's a little bit wild. You know, don't blend too much, otherwise you'll just end up with a big mess. You know, and obviously you can work back into stuff. Now, obviously depending on the thickness of the oil, it's going to take longer to dry. So if you've got, you need to like leave the painting to rest for a good 36 hours probably after doing an oil wash before you start working back into it again. You know, and on my next video, I'm going to work back onto it in resins. Ooh, let's have a bit of Viridian. Yeah, and sometimes I just use, you get, like, don't always think you have to be a snob when you buy oil paint and get the most expensive stuff, because the cheap stuff does other, you know, it does different things depending on what paint you're using. You know, if you're just going to do a wash, sometimes you get a much more even pigment from some cheaper paints. I mean, this was just stuff I got from the works ages ago, and I quite like their Viridian for washes and for when I mix it into resin and use it as a pure pigment. So when working on a white canvas, it's good to note that if you want an area to remain absolutely, I mean, this is not necessarily for abstract painting, but if you want an area to remain whiter than white, just leave the canvas white in that area, and you'll never be able to recapture that by painting a canvas white. It will always look a bit muddy, unless of course you've got lead white, which nobody uses that because you can't get it anymore. But you can. Well, some people can. So this is my next layer. It's, with a box canvas as well, it's worth noting that if you've got more heavier, because if you're using texture and pigment, you can pull down the center of the canvas. And the problem with that is that sometimes when you're running washes, they just tend to pull in the middle, the weight of the wash, especially because I use plastic washers, resin washers. It can sometimes distort the picture if you're not expecting it, and everything just runs to the center, and that's no good. If you don't want it, you know, you might want it. But I've often found that sometimes with the way I do washes, sometimes a cheap canvas is better because they twist, they're not very well put together, and the twist actually channels the wash, and you can get some very nice effects. One of my most popular paintings is done on the cheapest canvas I could find, and it turned out brilliantly because the wash channeled diagonally from corner to corner, and that was because it was cheap and the canvas twisted because it wasn't very well made. So, you know, that's the thing with art. It's like you've got to try stuff out. Don't just automatically assume that just because you're using the best materials, you're going to get the best results, because they might not be the results you want. So, you know, I would always recommend trying everything out if you can. So just a last little bit of blue. I think this needs some blue in this corner here. You know, and I mean, you can mute, I like to mute things. We're reintroducing colours to mute colours and blend colours. There we go. Somebody's popular today. Yeah, I'm surprised I'm not getting a phone call off Dave. Every time I record one of these videos, my little French pal just decides to call me up. Doesn't call me for a week. As soon as I'm doing a video, Dave's on the phone. He's got a sixth sense, so if the video cuts out, it's because he's called me. Okay, I'm living the feeling here. Yeah, getting in touch with the subconscious. Okay, so that's my wash layer for the day. Nice blend, mixing through the layers that are underneath, pulling them out and getting a nice sort of granulation where you've got the deep texture, because obviously with the acrylic it's created some channels and some layers. And then next time we're going to introduce some resin and you can see what the resin does. Okay, so I'm Mark, if you've never been here before. You may have found me because now I know how to use hashtags and stuff like that. So please like and subscribe, and yeah, there'll be more quality content coming your way, hopefully. Take care.